Hey everyone, welcome back to At Home Author, and I'm super excited today to have Adria Goetz of KT Literary here with me. I'll let her introduce herself just a little bit.
Hello, yeah, I'm Adria Goetz. I am a literary agent. I've been agenting since 2016, and I represent all sorts of books, but I do a lot of picture books by author illustrators, middle grade, and then right now I'm really looking to expand my list in like the adult fiction space, particularly rom-coms, thrillers, book club fiction, and then anything that is like kind of tinged with magic, like contemporary fantasy or magical realism or something like that.
Oh, I love that. I just love books. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a problem
Yes.
and not at the same time. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about how you got into the publishing industry just in general.
Yeah, well, I have found publishing to be very much like an apprenticeship type of industry. So I got my start when I was like a 19-year-old college intern at a local literary agency in the Seattle area called Martin Literary. And I just kind of clung on for dear life because there's so few opportunities to work in publishing when you are based in the Pacific Northwest and not interested in moving to New York for the rest of your life, which was me. So I interned there for 2 years and then I was an assistant and then I started agenting in 2016 there. And the rest is history.
I love
Now
that.
I'm now at KT Literary, like you said, and loving it. Our motto is nice people, great books, which I think like sums up the agency very well.
Oh, I love that. So what are some of the qualities that you look for when someone queries you, especially in children's literature? What makes something stand out or not?
Yeah, so when it comes to picture books, actually when it comes to middle grade too, there are kind of two F words. There's a bad F word and there's a good F word. The bad F word is familiar. So anything that feels very familiar, feels like it's been done before, feels like it's kind of just gonna blend in on a bookshelf. That's something I steer away from. And then the good F word is fresh. So anything that feels like, oh my gosh, this is just like literally like a breath of fresh air. Something hasn't been done this way before. That's something that I always really gravitate toward. Um, and just any project that feels like it's going to really delight the readership is always a good thing to see.
I love that. So what would you say are the most common mistakes that you see in queries?
There are two things that kind of I think hold hands. One is missing metadata. So like anything that like the title, the genre, the word count, the type of book that you're talking about. That is very important for me to see. Sometimes people just kind of start talking about their book, but they don't actually tell me, like, this is a middle grade fantasy, or this is a nonfiction picture book, or whatever it may be. And then the other thing is like really vague language. So I see this a lot on the adult side of things more often, where people will be like, this is a novel that's about a woman who's on a healing journey and it explores themes of like forgiveness and redemption and healing and love, and it's like, but what's the book actually about? Like, tell me the plot. Like, how does she go on this journey? What kind of journey are we talking about? Yeah, vague language is never a great thing to see. I like to see really like specific language. And I think that those things kind of go together because like it's really important to ground an agent in your project as quickly as possible. So when you're not telling us what type of book it is, or when you're not telling us about, what happens in the story, that just kind of makes us feel like we're floating and we need to be grounded.
Yeah, I was gonna say I got a pitch for something months ago and thought it sounded really, really awesome, but just wasn't something that I rep. And so was like, oh, I'll send this along to this other agent at my agency. It's very up her alley. And then it came in, and I was like, wait, this is a picture book? I thought this was an adult nonfiction.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so those things are very important because there's so many ways to write something. There's so many different angles to approach topics from that. Yeah, that transparency is really important for us to be in the right headspace to consider something too.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so what would be your biggest advice to aspiring children's book authors to make their manuscript stand out, especially in a market as saturated as today's is?
Yeah, I think finding an idea that's really amazing, like for me, the idea needs to win me over first. I need to think that just the general premise of the story is a really amazing concept. So once I fall in love with the idea, like then I'll go look at the manuscript. But if the idea doesn't catch my attention, then the manuscript kind of doesn't matter, as harsh as that might sound. Um, so yeah, the idea is king in my world.
Definitely. And I've run into it quite a few times where I've loved an idea, and then when I get to the manuscript, the execution doesn't really line up with whatever
Totally. Yeah.
the pitch was or the concept was, and it feels like two different books, or there's a disconnect there. So yeah, all of that consistency, I completely agree with. Let me see. So, what would you say are uh, some of the current trends in children's literature right now?
I mean, I think one of the trends is just how extremely competitive it is right now. Like one of the trends is that editors are not acquiring books right now. But that's depressing. We won't get into that. We won't talk about that. What I am seeing sell for picture books in middle grade is anything that is kind of like tinged with magic a little bit, just like has a little bit of something speculative, not necessarily like full blown fantasy set in another world, but just something with like a little bit of magic. That's like when I look at the past few sales I've done, that's what's been selling. And then in the picture book space, I feel like I'm seeing a lot of deals for nonfiction, particularly stories that are like historical nonfiction, not necessarily picture book biographies. There's so many picture book biographies, but things that just feel like you're mining history for these little historical footnotes, just these really interesting tidbits. I feel like I see a lot of sales in that space right now.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of that too, especially things with some type of arc or I have not been seeing a lot of straightforward nonfiction. It's been a lot of creative, fresh takes on nonfiction concepts. What would you say are your best tips for writing a query letter itself? I know it's a very specific thing.
Of course. No, I would say big picture, a query letter needs to be professional, concise, and friendly. So those are like the three adjectives to like hold dear to your heart as you're like writing and editing your query letter. And then like my other query tip is just to make sure that you're nailing that first paragraph. Because and I know a lot of agents do this as well, make snap decisions based off of the opening of a query letter very often. So in that first paragraph, it's important to include all of your metadata. So, your name, the title, the word count, the genre or the type of book. So if it's middle grade fantasy, if it's young adult science fiction, if it's a picture book, those things. And then kind of a quick big picture description of the project, of the plot. Some agents also suggest including comp titles in that opening paragraph. I think you can include them up top. You can also save them for later. I think sometimes, especially for if you're writing a novel, people will like to include really like big picture sort of conceptual comps. So for example, like if you are pitching a query letter or a project that's like a small town story, but it's set on Mars, then you might pitch it as like Gilmore Girls meets Star Wars. So like, conceptual comps, they'll put that in the first paragraph, and then later on they'll include more traditional comp titles. So like other science fiction novels that are set on a different planet that have published within the last 5 years. I think that works great. And then the first paragraph should also include a personalization if you have one. So if you met an agent at a conference, you can mention that. If you could say you represent my friend Tina Cho, or you could say you represented this book that I love. That's always great. Just make sure that like you have actually read the book that you say that you love. I think a lot of times people lie about that, and it kind of makes me laugh when people are like, I love that book, The Crescent Moon Tea Room, that you represented. And it's like, well, that actually hasn't published yet. So I don't think you've read it. But I mean, like if you see a deal for a book that sounds up your alley, you can always say, congratulations on your recent sale of The Crescent Moon Tea Room. Like it totally sounds like it's up my alley and I'm excited to read it. That's always super nice to hear. Um, but to give myself a little plug, I have like a full length query letter workshop available on my website, like the recording of it. So if you feel like you need more query letter tips, that's a great resource, I think.
Definitely. And I'll put that in the description box below so that it's nice and easy to find. Now, here's a question I didn't include on my list of things I sent you. Do people spell your name incorrectly often, and does it bother you?
Um, all the time. Yeah, every day. I get like Adrian, Andrea, Adriana, and then like my last name is like all sorts of things. I think because it's something I've been dealing with my whole life because my mother gave me a not very normal, well-known name. Um, it's not like an instant rejection for me. Like whenever I teach my queer letter workshops, I talk about like no soup for you moments, like quoting Seinfeld, the soup guy. So it's not like a no soup for you moment, but I think like in general, it is great to get a literary agent's name right. I would definitely recommend it.
I was gonna say I get misspellings all the time, and half the time it's one of those like it bothers me, but not in a I'm going to reject this person way. It's more of a wasn't it right there on the form before you hit the
Oh,
submit
totally,
button? Or
totally.
in emails a lot, it'll be wasn't it? Didn't I sign my name
Yep.
on the previous email? Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Um, but
To be
I'm
honest,
very used to that
what
too.
what bugs me more is a query letter that is addressed to like dear agent or like dear literary agent. That bugs me more because I'm just like, how hard is it to just include my name? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I've also gotten a couple where it would say somebody else's name entirely. Like I would get
Oh
a
yeah,
query
I
that
get
says,
that.
Dear
Yeah,
Adria. And I'm like,
yeah.
wait a
I
second.
get I get that all the time, and it's so funny because like I love being friends with literary agents. Like I'm in literary agent group chats, and like I like know people who represent in the same space. So it's like I often will know who they are like talking about or like who they're querying, and it's like, oh, James, we both get the same type of queries. Like that's so fun.
Yeah, agents talk, everyone.
Yes,
Agents
we
talk, but
do.
it's usually good things. Okay, so what advice, what one piece of advice would you give aspiring writers who are just starting out?
Does it have to just be one?
No.
Because I have a few things. I know I'm long-winded, but like my main thing is learn your stuff. Like do what you need to do to really um learn the space that you're writing in. So if you can get involved in I really recommend SCBWI and 12 by 12 if you're a children's book writer. Um, I just I have noticed like a higher quality in the submissions that I get from writers who are involved in those organizations versus writers who aren't. And then just like reading as many types of books in your space as possible, particularly books that have published within the last 5 years. So you can get a sense for what's out there, what's selling right now, what's already been done, but also just like the rhythm of the format. And then like my last big thing is just to find your people, like find your critique group, your critique partners, like you really need those people to give you editorial constructive feedback, but also just like for moral support because the writing and publishing journey can be pretty brutal and you need people who you can vent to, whose shoulder you can cry on. You need people who are going to celebrate your wins. So I think that's very important to find your village.
Absolutely. Well, do you have anything else for anyone watching this video?
I'm trying to think. I mean, if I had to give like one more little note or like piece of advice, I just always like to encourage people to work on being able to cope with rejection, because there's going to be so much rejection on this journey. Like even when you sign with an agent, there's a lot of rejection to deal with. So being able to build up a tolerance for it, I think is crucial in order to survive this industry. And I always tell writers, like, I don't want you to fear rejection. I actually want you to fear the absence of rejection, because if you're not regularly getting rejected, that probably means that you're not regularly like sending your work out. And so being able to kind of like rack up rejections as a badge of honor is like, that's a good quality to have.
Yeah, I like to tell my authors that every no you get leads you closer and closer to that yes, because you only need one yes. You don't need hundreds, tens, thousands. You just need one, um, and it means
Absolutely.
you're working towards it. So I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I will post the link to some of those resources you mentioned in the description box below. And then don't forget, if you're watching, to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos or tips or updates. Thanks, everyone.